Hey, welcome to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm joined today by Christopher Jackson, star of Hamilton, the movie, and also Bull on CBS, and a bunch of other things you've seen him in. Christopher, I wanted to start talking about Hamilton. Obviously, I guess premiered on Disney Plus last summer. What was it like? You've been with the show from the beginning, honestly, like before the beginning. What was it like watching? Watching the show with the original cast all these years removed from when you performed it and getting to see yourself with that original cast, I guess. Like, what was that like?
It's surreal. First time I ever seen any of my work on stage in a different medium, which was exciting and nerve wracking, and even years removed, I'm still pretty twitchy. The body remembers all of these different emotions. And the first time we watched it, Disney had sent us a screener right before to sort of prep for all the press, and I'm sitting there on the couch, and it was kind of the same experience the first time I actually sat in the theater and watched it with my wife. She just kind of gently would grab my arm when my face started contorting a little bit, and I started to sweat a little bit. It's a very surreal kind of experience. But it was great to finally be able to see from the audience's perspective the wonderful work that was going on stage, and what an amazing company and what an amazing show. And to be Tommy captured it so well that I really did feel like I had the best seat in the house. It was pretty incredible.
I wanted to ask you a little about the performance. I was lucky enough to see Hamilton performed with most of the original cast on stage. I saw you do it on Broadway, and then watching it again. I guess this was recorded over two performances, I think in June of 2016, and then there was some additional footage that Tommy shot. When you knew that it was going to be recorded, did that change or your performance at all? Like, did you think about that, or how did that work as an actor? Because obviously, I think there's a difference between a stage performance and like what you would do in a movie or a TV show. So I guess, like, did that affect your performance at all?
I'd like to think that it didn't, mostly because Hamilton is the kind of show that it's so difficult to pull off 8 times a week that just hitting your marks and just remembering, just sort of following that emotional through line throughout the whole course of the thing is already difficult. It's already a mountain that has to be climbed every single time you step on stage. I think Tommy's approach the entire time was, I know the show, I know where to put the cameras, I know what I'm looking for. It isn't important that you try to change. We don't need to change your marks, we don't need to do anything, because I think he appreciated how tricky it was to pull off every day. And so the emphasis was really just about maintaining what it is every day, which is maintaining the performance, which is engaging and putting yourself in a position. The audience gives you a lot of feedback. And so I think if we were able to focus just on that, it didn't really, for me at least, it didn't really affect the performance as much as, if we were shooting a film, like, yeah, you're going to have a couple of different stabs at it. But as Lynn likes to say, we were the best rehearsed film cast in the history of movie making.
Yeah, for sure. And then can you talk a little about, I'm fascinated that he did he did do additional shooting, it seems like, on stage and stuff. Can you talk about how that, like, when you, like, doing that and, like, that kind of, like, like you said, you get so much energy from the crowd, but, like, doing those scenes, I guess, like, to fill in and kind of make it into more of an intimate production for the film version, I guess. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, I know that there was some Steadicam work because of Andy's really intricate choreography and the staging of it. I think that the ability to get on stage for some of that Steadicam work was really important. But as I looked at the final product, I was like, it was so seamless. And from moving, what the camera did, I think, was just move closer and closer and closer and closer for the entire filming. The film experience is such that somehow they were able to draw you in even closer to the action. If you're sitting 150 feet back from from the stage, you might miss an expression up on the surround, you know what I mean? Or you just, the impact of being that close to an actor, and it changes your perspective, obviously. But by doing the Steadicam stuff and the things that we did outside of the audience, again, I kind of go back to my first answer. It was so difficult to pull that off. It was so difficult to stay in the moment. It was so difficult to stay as connected as we were. It was really just Tommy's job, I think, and he says it, just to capture it, just to find it. I will say that, the one part that really kind of grabbed me was a lot of the work during One Last Time. In my mind, you could tell that, Tommy, who is, one of my best friends, was capturing the relationship between two best friends on stage. There was something that just pulled me even closer to what was happening between, my character and Lynn's character. That was it was really moving to me, and I feel like he was probably the only person in the world that, because he understands our relationship, could really encapsulate the relationship between Washington and Hamilton in that moment, and it was just beautiful to me.
I would agree. I mean, I think it's funny, like, obviously, like I said, I saw it on Broadway, got to listen to the soundtrack a million times, and then watching it, I still got something new out of that, even watching it in the film. I think it's like, the Washington and the Hamilton relationship, and that performance is just so, it is a real showstopper, I guess. It's quite good. I guess you mentioned that, like, were there other things, like getting to revisit the show now, like years after you stopped performing in it? Was there something else or anything that you were like, that you kind of like looked at differently, or maybe were like, oh, this part is really, I did not expect that to hit like that now, watching it, like with time, having so much time has passed, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a little personal, I guess. Washington's life was filled with a lot of sadness, and a lot of urgency, and a lot of desperation, and as was I. I unfortunately, I lost my father in the second week of previews, and we had a very, difficult relationship. You could probably call it that. Having to leave the show to go home and bury him and come back gave me a really interesting and unexpected perspective on the life of of the man that I was portraying, and that most of his life was defined by loss. And it drew me in to what the process of a lifelong grief can be, what it was prior to the event, during, and then after, and then how that inflects and informs everything that you do from that moment on. And so it added an unexpected layer. Life in the theater is constantly a calibration about how you navigate all of the life things that are happening, and then all of the life in the theater, and then the role, and then the audience. It's just sort of a gradation of how you encounter and then react to all of these different, sort of forces that are all working in different directions all at the same time in life. And as I watched it, I was taken back to a place that was I guess more powerful and profound in my own personal journey than at the time I was aware of. And just how much of a release performing a role like that gives you on a daily basis. It just it sort of recalibrates on a daily basis how much of we have whole hum days, you know what I'm saying, but like everything in that environment is so heightened that you go on this just complete lifelong journey, all in the course of 2.45 out, and then you have the stage that turns into a green room, and then you're meeting your personal heroes, and you're meeting people that you have admired your entire lives, whether they be athletes or politicians or fellow artists, and everyone is so wide open, and the conversations that you have seem so unlikely and yet so normal, which was, I guess, an answer to a larger question just about the experience of that phenomenon. But it was a daily thing, and it just profoundly reshaped my imagination and my understanding of how powerful theater is.
Yeah, I mean, well, I was thinking I wanted to ask you that too, about like the power of the theater and the show. Obviously, like premiered it during the Obama years, and it kind of peaked towards the end of his administration. And now the movie comes out here in this, this tremendously traumatic summer where we had like protests around the country for social justice and like against police brutality. And then obviously like leading into the election, I found that like watching it now, you get like a different perspective, obviously from a political standpoint. And I was wondering, like, for you, I guess, did you feel that, and like how like the movie kind of hit maybe differently than the show even did at the time, not just because so many more people were able to see it, but just like the message of the show and like what it's kind of like espousing?
I think great pieces of art say different things about us depending on what area you're in, right? And the interesting thing is that because of the existence of our just our the architecture of how we communicate is so much more immediate now. It's interesting that most people met the show through the soundtrack, through the recording. It's interesting that this show is sung through pretty much, what you hear on the record is what you hear, in the theater, but that it lived in people's imaginations in a much more relevant way than if you'd actually come to see the show. In the time that the original company was on stage, only about 500,000 people had seen it, which is a huge number. But if you compare that to the number of people that actually heard, that had listened to the soundtrack on repeat, and then you see a glimpse on the Grammys or see this appearance here or this appearance there, but it's still something that lived in our imagination. So if you think about what Hamilton was really about, Hamilton was about the written word, right? He himself, his everyone then was truly influenced by the ideas and the thoughts, and the movements were sprung up from a genuine sort of wellspring of ideas. Good, bad, and in between, but it inspired people to move, to then act, like have a thought and then act, not just an emotional one, but a considered one. And the way that Hamilton's sort of hold on the zeitgeist for so long really played with people's imaginations. Nothing that Lynn introduced in this piece is new. It's just a different collection of thought, right? And a different way of hearing hip hop again in a medium that had never really given outside of the other work that Lynn had done, it hadn't really given a home to hip hop. And the idea that all of these different things can come together and actually make a compelling story. And so, regardless of what time you're viewing a Hamilton in, it's still a monumental testament to the idea of ideas and the way that they work with us and the way that we then share them. Jeffrey didn't have to spend a ton of money advertising our show. People talked about it. Good, bad, or indifferent, people were discussing it. People were interested in having conversations about it. And so it became sort of this rally point for ideas, and then other ideas and other things sprung out from that. I can't help but think that in one way or the other, it influenced a young person who normally would be sitting around their house playing Xbox to say, there's injustice in our country, and if our country is going to be better, I have to get outside and get on the streets. And that's what they did. And I have to believe that there were many, many people out there who were inspired by the things that we were talking about in Hamilton, and then were then inspired to go out and involve themselves in a different kind of way.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I found so heartening this summer when it came out was like, there was obviously, like we said, like many, many more people were able to see it this summer, right? Like than had seen it obviously on stage and even listened to the soundtrack. And, but like I found the debate and the discourse around it was like really very smart, like about like how like the founding fathers, how we should like consider the founding fathers, and the juxtaposition of them fighting for liberty, but also being slaveholders and all these different things. I found that conversation was like really good. It wasn't like a hot take economy or anything. It was like, this is like considered debate and stuff. And I was like, I think that speaks to the power of the show and the kind of like how great the show is, that it's like, it's not being like kind of cast aside. It's like, oh, this is really conversing and stuff. And I just found that really fascinating. I guess for you guys, I imagine you guys also talked about a lot of these things too, as performers, like playing these characters, like, playing George Washington, who had, like you said, like, a lot of loss in his life, and obviously like had a lot of good things about his life and some obviously bad things about his life too. I would imagine you guys debated that as well backstage, or throughout this process.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. The cool thing is that, for me, most of my Washington's journey through the show isn't on stage.
Right.
The bulk of his, we see Washington and Hamilton when at an inflection point, right? But if you don't know what's happening before you arrive in that scene, well, then, it kind of doesn't really give you any kind of fuel to play that scene. What you see is a collection, we call them the founders, but like they had done something that had never been done before. No one ever thought to write down the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." Clearly, it was an idea that they had considered but didn't really understand in its vastness, right? Like this idea was lofty, but they were clearly not up to the task of living up to those words, and they didn't honestly see the hypocrisy in their own lives, right? Because there were other systems that were wholly supported by the institution of slavery. And so we look at a show like Hamilton, and I think people miss the point when they think that it's celebrating our founding fathers. I think what they're seeing is the hypocrisy that was innate in these men. And so rather than like hide that under a bushel, take that thing out, examine it, and then allow it to spark the conversation that it needs to spark, because we need to see the founders in the light that they truly lived in and that they themselves chose to live in. And we need to sort of step away from the mythologizing of who these people were. We understand, I believe if we understand these people in the way that in their fullness, we can appreciate the good and we can criticize the bad, and then we can not make the same mistakes that they made in various forms.
Right. And then last thing before we wrap up here, I know obviously I believe you must be in production on Bull now, right? I think you're in.
Yeah.
So and you're working during the pandemic, obviously. Like, I mean, like, where do you so tied to Broadway and stuff? Like, what is gonna, like, what do you hope happens over the next year? Is like, we kind of slowly get people vaccinated and like get, things start to reopen and productions begin. Like, I mean, what is your sense there as like, someone in New York and obviously like, who has such a strong tie to the theater community?
Well, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that, first and foremost, that people can be safe again, being out, going about their lives. I know that Broadway does a tremendous job of giving people something to look forward to. It's a trip to get on a plane, to get in the hotel, to come to New York, to sit in a room full of 1,000, other people and have an experience. There's a reason why Broadway exists, and it has existed for so long, and that is that people want to come together and experience something in a safe way. Obviously, so many of our brothers and sisters are hurting. If for no other reason than there's a whole community of folks that have made it their life's work to give to the theater, and give by giving, I mean they've lived their life in a theater. They're working when the rest of the world is playing for the purpose of creating a better place, creating a better world. I mean, Broadway does just theater in general, just a tremendous job in helping people appreciate the things that they have and aspire to more. And like, I can't wait to get back on the stage. I've been very fortunate and blessed to be on a long running Broadway show and then a long running television show. I'm really grateful and very fortunate. But as soon as it's safe to do so, Broadway's going to be the first one to open its doors because people need it. If they didn't, they'd find other things to do. But the reality is that they do. For a lot of people, and I say this often, theater is like church, because there are very few institutions in our society where a group of people will come together, they will touch, and they will agree that we're going to focus our energy and we're going to find a deeper level of expression, and we're going to share it through someone else. But we're then going to learn something about ourselves, and that's what Broadway does, and it's what theater does, and I cannot wait to I want to be in the front row the second that it opens back up, and God willing, I might be up on a stage. I can't wait to get back to work.
Yeah,
doing that work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I think that's obviously that was another reason I think why getting to watch Hamilton, on Disney Plus this summer was such a relief for people, because it was really, people love seeing live theater. I think, whether it's on Broadway or even their local community theaters and stuff,
sure,
and to be able to experience that in some way and watching that show is really special. So Christopher, thank you so much.
It means something. It's important.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. And, you can watch Christopher on Disney Plus right now on Hamilton. It's streaming right now. And you can also see him on Bull on CBS. Christopher, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. God bless, man.
Thanks, man. Bye.
Peace.